Good afternoon, Bappa. Good afternoon. Good noon, Aditi. Am I clearly audible and visible? Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon to all. Good afternoon to everyone who have bothered to tune in. You know, today uh, I would be talking about the history of feminism as it continues to grapple with with space, as it continues to grapple with space, right? So feminist history uh, has basically been a history of their fight for space. Now, if we sort of come to the first wave, if we come to the first wave feminism, then we would see that they were basically fighting for public space, right? They were basically fighting for public space. Now, what do I mean when feminists used to sort of fight for public space? I mean that they were fighting for their right to vote. I mean that they were fighting for their right to be educated. I mean that they were fighting to establish their right in institutions, in national politics, international politics, in different spheres of public activities, in governmental activities, in institutional activities. So women wanted to be a part of them all, right? So women wanted to be a part of them all. So therefore, the first wave was basically concerned with women's fight for their participation in the public space. Women were not allowed to be a part of the public space, and that is what they were basically fighting against. That is what basically they were fighting against. They wanted to be around that public space. Okay, so I understand Uh, okay, what is public space? Okay, public space is school, public space is college, public space is university, public space is bank, public space is uh, railways, public space is uh, any institutional body, governmental or non-governmental. So therefore, women were told, if I try and explain the feminist movement of the first wave specifically, then during the first wave feminist movement, during the first wave feminist resistance, women were fighting against the fact that they were not allowed in public places. তোমার স্কুলে চাকরি করার দরকার নেই, তোমার কলেজে চাকরি করার দরকার নেই, তোমার ইউনিভার্সিটিতে যাওয়ার দরকার নেই, তোমার রেলে যাওয়ার দরকার নেই, তুমি বাড়িতে বসে রান্না করো, চাপাটি বেলো, রুটি বেলো, ভাত করো, ডাল করো, do your dishes and take care of home. Home is where you are suited best and you are suited most. When women were told to stay inside that Lakshman Rekha, stay inside the domestic sphere, as it were, then you can understand that women were fighting against that Lakshman Rekha, right? Women were fighting against that that restriction that they need to, they must, they have to stay within the house or within the domestic sphere. So therefore, they had to be fighting for their participation in public sphere, but their participation in public sphere. So that's what the first wave is basically all about. So they had to shout for their right for education. They had to shout for their right to cast vote and be a part of the government and be a part of the selectional procedure of the government, be a part of all institutional bodies of state across the country. So therefore, women were not restricted to the house. Women were wanting to be a part of the public sphere. So the politics of space is something that their fight was pinned on, and they were fighting for their survival in public sphere. So that's what the first wave feminism was all about. Now, the feminist movement moved on, and as it continued, the feminist movement, it became more and more dynamic, and we come to the second wave feminism. So what is the difference between first wave feminism and the second wave feminism? The second wave feminists, they started realizing that not only is the first wave and their fight for public space is important, they also began to realize that they are not even safe at home. That they are not even safe at home. Let me explain this little bit. the last bit is very, very significant. The last bit is very, very important. They are not even safe at home. What does that mean? What does that mean? It means that while they were fighting for the public space during the first wave of feminist movement, during the first wave of the feminist movement, they have taken it for granted that they are okay inside their house. They have started taking it for granted that they are okay inside their house. No, they are not okay inside their house. So suddenly they have started realizing that home is no longer safe. Not only is the public space is gendered, something that the first wave feminists realized, but also the private space, the domestic space, the space inside your household is also gendered. So now the second wave feminists, they have begun to realize that the home is something that they also need to fight against. And women not only started fighting against their limitations in public sphere, they have also started fighting for their right in private sphere. I'm giving you an example to illustrate this. During the first and second wave of COVID-19, I have known and heard many women saying, and most of them are happily married, I have known and heard many women saying, "Kobe je schoolta khulbe." They were so happy with their husbands during lockdown, inside their house. Kobe je college-ta khulbe. They were so happy with their husbands inside their house. Kobe je university-ta khulbe. They were so happy with their husbands inside their house. Kobe je bank-ta khulbe. They were so happy inside their house. Those women were so happy, so happy with their respective husbands inside their domestic sphere that they were desperate to school to be reopened. They were desperate to colleges to be reopened. They were desperate to institutional bodies to be reopened, and they could join there and get a respite from their domestic torture. So you see why I keep saying that home is a safety net, is something that is much of a myth. And this is something that the second wave feminists, not the first wave feminists, but the second wave feminists, they began to realize. And they then started shouting for, fighting for their right inside their house. And the realization became stronger and stronger that not only is the public space is gendered and patriarchal, but also the private space, the domestic space is even more patriarchal, is even more gendered, is even more patriarchal, ironically is even more gendered than the public space. Wow. So this is something that the second wave feminists began to realize as the movement of feminism progressed from the first wave to the second wave movement. So therefore, we come to the second wave, and we come to the second wave feminists shouting for their right, even inside their houses, and that myth of home sweet home breaks down. Because and now the second wave feminists, they began to shouting that yes, charity begins at home, but there was not much of a charity inside their home. And suddenly the women started realizing that home is not as sweet as it is thought to be. Home is not as cute as it is considered to be. Right? So home is something that is extremely patriarchal and extremely gendered, and women are no more safer inside their home than they are outside the public places. So therefore, this is how the second wave feminists moved on from the first wave feminism and the first wave feminist resistance and movement. So therefore, they started realizing that this awareness of space and this fight for space, I'll say this again, this awareness for space and this fight for space is not necessarily geographical, it is political. It is political. So therefore this space is hardly a geography. Space is a politics. And unless you understand how and why space is political, you do not realize how space is gendered and how space is patriarchal. And if you do not realize how space is gendered and how space is patriarchal, you do not realize why are you marginalized, not only in the public space, first wave feminism, but also in the private space, that is the second wave feminism. So therefore, they have started fighting for their right inside their domestic sphere. Now, as this fight continues through the second wave feminism, as this fight resumes through the second wave feminist movements, there began to be a very strong awareness of a manifestation that not only is public space marginalizing women, not only is private space marginalizing women, but also women do not even have the right over their own body, over their own sexuality, over their own desire. Right? So women do not have right in the public sphere. First wave feminism. Women do not have right in the public, in the private sphere, in the domestic sphere, as it were. So the second wave feminism. Now women started realizing through the second wave feminism that they do not even have the right over their own sexual body. Over their own body. Women do not have right over their own desire. Women do not have right over their own sexuality. So as they started realizing this, and how do we, let me give one reference point of this realization. The contraceptive pills, the birth control pills are amazing. The abortions, they are amazing examples of how women's body are not only considered a non-human body, but also considered almost a machine. And we need women in our domestic space to perpetuate reproductivity, to perpetuate through the glorification of motherhood, and through the perpetuation of patriarchy. So, therefore, something very interesting began to develop through the back end of the secondary feminist movement. And that the second wave feminists therefore began to realize, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously, that all now these are the three assumptions. This is so unfortunate that second wave feminism is based on these three assumptions. It's based on these three assumptions. Based on these three assumptions. And what are these three assumptions? That all feminists are heterosexual, that all feminists are heterosexual, and যত নারী রয়েছে সবাই heterosexual, all feminists are heterosexual, all women are heterosexual, and all women are born female. This is a very dangerous assumption, that the entire secondary feminism is sort of predicated upon. So secondary feminists, they took it for granted that all feminists are heterosexual, that all women are heterosexual, and that all women are born female. These are the three assumptions that second wave feminist movement so heavily relied upon. It's pretty unfortunate that they took these assumptions for granted. ধরেই নিয়েছিল সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিস্টরা যে যত ফেমিনিস্ট রয়েছে সবাই হেটেরোসেক্সুয়াল, যত উইমেন রয়েছে সবাই হেটেরোসেক্সুয়াল, এবং যত উইমেন রয়েছে তারা সবাই ভ্যাজাইনা নিয়ে জন্মায়। এমন কোনো উইমেন হতে পারে না যে ভ্যাজাইনা না নিয়ে জন্মাবে না। হু আর ইউ, ভয়েস অফ অনু? May I know your name? Voice of Onu. I would be very happy if you introduce yourself. Voice of Onu. Who is this voice that Onu is representing in my YouTube channel live? হ্যাঁ, যেটা বলছিলাম যে এই অনুশ্রী মণ্ডল, my UG student. Okay. Enjoying the lecture, Anushri? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I was talking about very interesting three assumptions that second wave feminism is based on. এইটাকে একটু পরিষ্কার করে বোঝা যাক। সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিস্টরা, বিকজ মেনি স্টুডেন্টস আর listening to this lecture, some of them are UG students, some of them are PG students, বাট তোমাদের সবাইকে এই জায়গাটা খুব সাবধানে বুঝতে হবে, অত্যন্ত সাবধানে এই জায়গাটাকে স্টাডি করতে হবে। দেখো, সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিস্টরা কিন্তু যা বলছে আমি বললাম সবটাই, কিন্তু তাদের এই সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিস্টদের বক্তব্যটা তিনটে অনুমানের ওপরে কিন্তু দাঁড় করানো আছে। এই অনুমানগুলোর কিন্তু কোনো মাথামুন্ডু নেই, সেই জন্য সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিজমের কিন্তু খুব বিপদ। তা আগে ধরে নেওয়া যাক কোন কোন অনুমান যার উপরে সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিজম দাঁড়িয়ে রয়েছে। প্রথম অনুমান, যে যত ফেমিনিস্ট রয়েছে তারা সবাই কিন্তু হেটেরোনর্মেটিভ। যত উইমেন রয়েছে, এবং ওরা ধরেই নিয়েছে সব উইমেনরা হলো সবাই ফেমিনিস্ট, আর সব উইমেনরা হলো সবাই হেটেরোসেক্সুয়াল। এমন কোনো ওম্যান থাকতে পারে না যে হেটেরোসেক্সুয়াল না, এরকম হতেই পারে না। আকাশ ভেঙে পড়বে, মাটি ফাঁক হয়ে যাবে, স্টার জলসায় সিরিয়াল দেখানো বন্ধ হয়ে যাবে, এরকম যদি কোনো ওম্যান থাকে যে হেটেরোসেক্সুয়াল না, এটা ধরেই নিয়েছে সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিস্ট। কেন ধরে নিয়েছে এর উত্তর সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিস্টই বলতে পারবে। আর একটা অসাধারণ বক্তব্য সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিস্টরা অ্যাজিউম করে নিয়েছে। কি ধরে নিয়েছে না, সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিস্টরা এটাও ধরে নিয়েছে যে যত মহিলা রয়েছে গোটা বিশ্ব সংসারে, তারা সবাই ভ্যাজাইনা নিয়ে মায়ের পেট থেকে বেরোবে। এমন কোনো ওম্যান হতেই পারে না যে ভ্যাজাইনা নিয়ে মায়ের পেট থেকে বেরোয়নি, হতেই পারে না। সো অল উইমেন আর বর্ন ফিমেল। উইমেন মাস্ট বি বর্ন ফিমেল। Women have to be born female. This is the third assumption. এবার যদি কোনো ওম্যান ভ্যাজাইনা না নিয়ে জন্মায়, তাকে আমরা ওম্যান বলে কনসিডার করবোই না। আলোচনা শেষ, সর্বনাশ শেষ। We will not consider that woman in the first place. কেন আমরা ওম্যানকে, সেই ওম্যানটাকে আমরা ওম্যান বলে কনসিডার করবো না? কেননা স্যার, সেই ওম্যানটা তো পিনিস নিয়ে জন্মেছে। So all women are born female, all women are heterosexual, and all feminists are heteronormative. These are the three almost extraordinary assumptions that this second wave feminism is based on. Now, towards the end of the 1960s, there were some developments out of the second wave feminist movement. And the first development is that nobody is born male, nobody is born female. Then they began to realize that then, which means gender is socially and culturally constructed. কেউ নারী হয়ে জন্মায় না, কেউ পুরুষ হয়ে জন্মায় না। সমাজ সংস্কৃতি তাকে নারী পুরুষ বানিয়ে দেয় বা নারী পুরুষকরণ ঘটিয়ে দেয়। So therefore, gender is a social construct. But একটা জায়গায় সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিজম আবার আটকে থাকলো, সেটা হলো হ্যাঁ 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 দাদা বুঝতে পেরেছি, জেন্ডার ইজ সোশ্যাল, জেন্ডার ইজ পলিটিক্যাল, জেন্ডার ইজ কালচারাল, জেন্ডার ইজ আইডিওলজিক্যাল। একদম বুঝতে পেরেছি, ভালো করে বুঝতে পেরেছি। লিঙ্গ নিয়ে কেউ জন্মায় না, সমাজে লিঙ্গকরণ ঘটে। বাট সেক্স তো স্যার ওটা তো বায়োলজিক্যাল না। এই জায়গাটি থেকে লিসেন টু দিস ভেরি কেয়ারফুলি, লিসেন টু দিস এক্সট্রিমলি কেয়ারফুলি। এই জায়গাটি থেকে কিন্তু উইমেনরা কিন্তু সেকেন্ড ওয়েভ ফেমিনিজম কিন্তু উইমেনদেরকে বের করতে একদমই পারবে না। কি না, হ্যাঁ আমরা মেনে নিচ্ছি জেন্ডার ইজ সোশ্যাল, জেন্ডার ইজ কালচারাল, জেন্ডার ইজ পলিটিক্যাল, বাট সেক্স তো বায়োলজিক্যালি না। আপনি বাইক চালিয়ে ক্রিকেট খেলবেন, সেটা আপনার ম্যাসকিউলিনিটি। আপনি পুতুল খেলবেন, রান্না করবেন, সেটা আপনার ফেমিনিটি। বাট পেনিস আর ভ্যাজাইনা এগুলো তো মেল আর ফিমেলই না। পেনিস তো মেলই না, ভ্যাজাইনা তো ফিমেলই না। নাও when we are saying this, we are understanding that gender is social, but what we are not understanding, what the second wave feminism did not understand unfortunately, is that sex is also social, sex is also political, sex is also cultural, and the difference between sex and gender is that there is no difference between sex and gender. Both are socially constructed, both are fictions, both are lies. So therefore, this is where I would end this talk. This is where second wave feminism couldn't capitalize on the Luddigian sex, that is the second sex of Simone de Beauvoir, who was saying one is not born a woman, one becomes a woman. There is no guarantee in Beauvoir's account that one is necessarily female. If there is no guarantee in Beauvoir's account that one is not necessarily a female, then one could also be male. Then the statement reads like that female is not born a woman but becomes a woman. Similarly, male is not born a woman, male becomes a woman. So the emphasis is not who becomes what, emphasis is on the performative of that process of becoming, and the fact that Judith Butler in 1990 would come and say that gender and sex are similar, there is no difference between sex and gender, both are lies and both are performances, both are not nouns, not adjectives, not verbs, not adverbs but verbs. Gender is a verb. So therefore I would end my lecture on this note. Therefore the emphasis is not who becomes what, emphasis is on the process of becoming. একজন নারী হয়ে জন্মায় না, সমাজ তাকে নারী করে দেয়, তাহলে সে একজন তো পুরুষও হতে পারে। সো পুরুষ নারী হয়ে জন্মায় না, সমাজ তাকে নারী করে দেয়। সো ফলে নারী করাটা হলো কিন্তু একটা ভার্ব, একটা পারফরম্যান্স। এবং যদি নারী করাটা একটা সোশ্যাল পারফরম্যান্স হয়, তাহলে যে কোনো জেনিটালিয়ার বডি নারী হতে পারে, নারী হওয়ার পারফরম্যান্সে যেতেই পারে। So if one is not born a woman but becomes a woman, that means that female is not born a woman but becomes a woman. That could also mean that male is not born a woman, male becomes a woman. That means male is not born a man, male becomes masculine. Something that would open up intersectional feminism and masculinity studies throughout the third wave feminism. But I would talk about this transition from second wave feminism to the third wave feminism, probably in my next lecture. Have you enjoyed my lecture? Thank you, Bappa. Thank you, Bappa. Thank you so much. Thank you, Anusri. Thank you, everyone, for listening to me. Thank you, Aditi. Hope to see you very, very shortly. Meanwhile, do your homework on how I have delivered this lecture on the transition of first wave feminism to second wave feminism, from their fight for public space to the fight for domestic space, and from their second wave feminism to the third wave feminism, that is from their fight for private space to their fight for their own body. And then we, in our next lecture, probably would try and investigate the transition from second wave feminism to the third wave feminism through LGBTQ movements, through intersectional feminism, through masculinity studies, to more importantly queer theory. But meanwhile, what I have done in this lecture, I have investigated on why we did have the first wave movement and how did the first wave movement give way to the second wave movement, and how would the second wave movement would open up possibilities for the third wave feminist movement towards the back end of the 20th century. Thank you so much, and see you very, very shortly. Thank you. Bye bye.